Session today with Happy Jack Ilfrey and his recollections of his adventures during the Second World War. And we had left off previously with the story concerning his evasion. And I think the last thing that you had mentioned is that you had spent the night in feather bed or something. You kind of sunk in that, and then we're on the road again. And I'd like for you to go into this encounter where the Germans actually solicited your help with this wounded soldier, if you will.
Okay, that is sort of toward the end of my trip, as you might call it, that I was working on, to get back to our lines, or the British lines. I didn't know just where I would cross.
Okay.
It happened that I did cross right into the British lines.
And what happened? I mean, you came upon these Germans, and there was a wounded soldier.
No, let's see. The feather bed was in the was with the Catholic priest that I was staying with that particular night. It was I forget a seminary, I guess you'd say. They had taken me in and fed me and put me up that night. And it was after that they packed me a little food in my little knapsack thing, and I tied to the bicycle and took off again on the road. I was going to get a map of France out and go through some of the towns, if you wish, that I went through.
Maybe if we have enough tape at the end, we'll do that. We'll show a few pictures and stuff.
Okay, because
basically you're going on a north course, so is what you're going.
Yes,
trying to get back to the lines from Angers or.
And I came to a rather large town. I would have to come up with a name. I would have to go look at a map. The bridge going across this river had been knocked out by us, because I remember we had trips in this. We had bombing missions in this area at a certain an airfield at one of these towns. Anyway, I'll go back. One of the towns I came to, the road ended at the bridge going across the river, and I was wondering how I was going to get across. But there was a few girders and things in the bridge that were just sticking up and sticking out where it had not been repaired. But I picked up my bicycle and carefully edged across, like a piece of the bridge that was still there. I edged across and got across to the other side, and then continued on my trip. Oh, okay, it's coming back to me. The town of Laval, L-A-V-A-L,
okay,
was a fairly large town, and had been, when I came to it, it had been pretty badly damaged. And I went through it. I didn't see any activity there. I wondered where the people were. They're bound to have been around, but I never did run into any people. But I successfully got across this bridge, and I'm in these a lot of hills in this part of France, and not mountains but just hills. And I'd push the bicycle up the hill, and then get on it and go down. Build up pretty good speed going down. I did that. It seemed like several hundred times just to keep my pace going along the road. And I was going down a hill at a pretty good rate of speed, and noticed out in front of me and to the right was the airfield at Laval. And I was coming right up to the entrance to the airfield, and like a lot of our airfields here in the United States, Lackland, Kelly, that you have gates at that you go through to get onto the field, and here was a gate, and I didn't know what else to do except just ride right up to it. I might say that in the meantime, I saw a lot of French on the road, refugees moving south away from the front lines with on bicycles and little one-horse carts and carts they were pushing and pulling with their belongings. And I would say hello to everybody that I passed, and they in turn would say hello to me. And I was stopped at this gate, and he must have been like an enlisted soldier, German fella. Just as I came to a stop, and he didn't exactly open the gate. It had one of those like a railroad type things that you push or pull, and I don't know the name for that, but he walked back to another little, what looked like a little, it was just a little house-like effect, and came walking back toward me where I was at the gate with a German officer. And they started talking to me. Looked me over. They started talking to me. They gave me a quick body search, and I didn't have anything on me. Didn't have a gun or anything like that. I did have my little knife, and by the way he was fooling with my pocket, I knew that he wondered what it was, and I just pulled it out and showed him the knife, and he didn't react much to it, and then I put it back in my pocket. It was like what we would call it, just a little pocket knife. It was a French knife, but that the kid that helped me get started gave me as I left the town of Adonai that first morning. But they were talking to me, and I had my French identity card and showed it to them, and they looked at it, and which the French had fixed up for me before I left them, the French people that helped me. And they looked it over and didn't say much of anything, and this German soldier, pretty big fella, and was standing there by the officer, and they were talking back and forth, and finally the officer said, go ahead, and the enlisted personnel went over and did open up the barrier on the gate so I could get through, but he still had my identity card in his hand and never did hand it back to me. So on an urge, or I don't know, I just politely reached over, took it out of his hand, and put it back in my pocket, got on my bicycle and went on. And that was that. In a way, I guess he thought that was pretty presumptuous of me, but he didn't get mad about it or say much of anything, so I just went on my merry old way. Because that was one time that identity card is like what we'd call a passport, my picture in it and all, came in handy. Mm-hmm. Very much in handy.
Mm-hmm. Were there any planes at this place that you're talking about?
At one point, I did see two Spitfires together coming along, pretty much along the road. The Germans were in. As I was going through what were the fields and all, I saw several of their big German 88 guns mounted out in areas, and they were shooting at these Spitfires, and they hit one of them, and he just kept going the way he was going, but he was smoking. But I never see him go down. But I did see German equipment on the road, their cars, and I mean their military vehicles and those big guns. I did see those, and I saw where they had been stringing a lot of, on the side of the road, they had been stringing a lot of wires, like I guess communication type wires. And I did notice the colors of these wires. They were like in a group and kind of wrapped together, and there was a red, white, and a black one, which when I got back to England, the intelligence people that interviewed me, that's what they told me. They were communication type wires that they were using.
Now, I don't know exactly where in the sequence of events in this evasion, but you made mention in your book of an incident at, well, I'm not sure where it was, but you actually saw a flight of 6 P-38s doing some strafing, and it kind of excited you, and it really caused a lot of havoc there for momentarily. And you also witnessed some collateral damage at flares, F-L-E-R-S or something. Flares. Okay. Could you tell me something about that? These was it 6 P-38s strafing?
Well, just out in the countryside, like where I was just merrily riding on my bicycle, and I heard. Oh, let's back up a little bit. In one section, a German truck full of soldiers passed me on several occasions. And then further on down the road, it would be stopped, and I'd pass it. And then again, here they'd come, and they would pass me again. And some boys, some German soldiers on the back. And one time they passed pretty slowly, and one of them just kind of beckoned at me like this, and I took it to be, well, that if I wanted to, I could hang on to the truck to help me go down the road, and that's exactly what I did. And they were kind of laughing and talking like young teenage boys would. They didn't say much of anything to me, but amongst themselves they were laughing and talking. And we were at one time was climbing up a rather steep hill, and I was hanging on, and I heard I heard a most familiar sound to me, P-38s. And as they got toward the top of the hill, they stopped, and I just kept going, and further up, a little more up the hill, and I was toward the top of the hill when the P-38s must have spied the truck, because here they came down strafing the road and started strafing at the truck, and the German soldiers all just piled out of it, get off into the ditch and the grass and all, and I was standing there watching this. It was the most invigorating sight for me to see. I felt like jumping up and down and clapping, but of course I didn't. And I also remember I wished that I had a camera. I could take a picture of this, but of course I didn't.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, before you commence there, I mean, did you subsequently find out that maybe some of those P-38s were from Kingscliff, or you didn't find anything about it, or?
Well, they had markings on them, but they were not our 20th Fighter Group markings.
Okay, so they were not.
I've kind of forgotten just what markings they did have. The markings they had on them told me they were 9th Air Force people.
Okay, tactical Air Force.
Yes, tactical.
Okay. And then you don't have to follow this absolutely chronologically on a day-to-day basis, but then you had this incident, where you helped a wounded German. Could you go through that? They kind of enlisted your support to do something there. How did that come about?
Well, I was at one small town, and I was at the well in the center of the town, getting myself a drink. Every time I did this, which was quite often, it was the only way I was able to get some decent water. The thought always came to me, I sure hope my typhoid shots are working, coming out of this well and all. And I was standing there drinking, and there was another young fella, that's older than myself, and parked against a building was one of our Jeeps, one of our American Jeeps, and some German soldiers were trying to get it started. And the thought came to me, back on the base in England, with our Jeeps, they changed hands quite often. You'd park it at night, you'd go back the next morning, it wasn't there, because we learned that, and everybody had one, they carried with them a rotor that would fit down into the distributor cap to make it fire up. And so I just said to myself, well, if I just had my rotor, I could get it started for them, but I didn't have my rotor. But this boy was kind of watching them, and he was standing right in close to me and looking, and he spoke, and I of course didn't understand all of his French. And I felt safe in telling him who I was and what I was doing, and he looked astonished and kind of looked over the Germans, and I kind of nodded that I saw them and all, but they wasn't bothering us. But in the course of talking with him, he spoke a little English. He told me to come on, and he'd take me to his house. That he did tell me, I think at that time, that his mother had relatives in Baltimore, Maryland, and that he had been with her a couple of times as a very young kid visiting. Mm-hmm. And he had learned, of course his mother spoke very good English. And we went to the house. They were quite nice to me, and we had something to eat, and we had the wine, of course, to go with it, and conversations, and we began to hear the guns from the front line. We started to hear, and they said there was not elderly, but a couple of older men that were there, and they were telling the mother, who spoke back to me, that they believed that they could tell by the sound of the guns, that they said that the guns we were hearing were British, and that they told me that the British were pretty badly held down in Caen. In fact, I think the British learned later that they lost a lot of soldiers in the Caen area trying to take that French city. Anyway, it came time to go to bed, and they pointed out where I could sleep, and she told all of us there that don't take off any clothes, leave your shoes on, in case we all have to get up and run out to keep away from the guns. I remember that. But then the next morning, I started out again. I can't determine which morning it was, the 4th, 5th, or 6th morning that the French had taken care of me the night before, and I was able to on my trip. So I'm on the bicycle again, and I come across two Germans in front of me, walking my way, were two German soldiers, and they had a very badly, I could tell, a very badly wounded soldier in a wheelbarrow. They were pushing him, and as I came up to me, they acted like they wanted me to stop, and I did, and again told no, that the Germans didn't tell me anything because I couldn't speak German, but I could tell that this kid was very badly wounded, this soldier, and they got across to me the idea that they were taking him back to a medical station further back the road. I had seen that. Something in the order of what we would call a field hospital. I could tell as I passed it, I think the day before, or earlier that morning, I had seen this and realized that it was like what we would call a field hospital. Some Red Crosses on their vehicles, those ambulance, and so they indicated to me to take this German soldier back to that field station, and I then got the wheelbarrow and started pushing the kid. And in the course of doing so, of course, that got pretty heavy. I was in my middle 20s about that time, perfectly physical fit, but the load in the wheelbarrow did get rather hard. So, and he was bleeding pretty bad from his stomach area, and he was moaning and groaning, and I at one place I stopped to rest, and I felt around his stomach, in my escape kit that what was around, that was around my American escape kit, had some, should have had some morphine syrettes in it, for in case I had gotten wounded in the airplane, was able to give myself morphine to cut out the pain. So I felt around his waist, and I didn't feel anything like that, and I was a little hesitant about using mine. I must have wanted to save him for myself. But anyway, he had on a dirty, raggedy like undershirt, and I tried to fold that and all so that it would fit across the wound in his stomach. I tried to clean a little bit of dirt and grass that was there, and just put it down in his belt and try to keep it from bleeding. I don't know whether it worked or not. I don't.
Just the interesting irony here your foe. I mean, you're helping and assisting.
Well, but at the same time, the heavier he got, the more I kept pushing. He had some cyanide, like we heard Germans did, to kill themselves, and so he could
put him out of his misery.
Yeah, well, that put him out. Period.
Oh.
The cyanide would kill you, you know.
What did he look like he was going to die, or I mean, or
he was in pretty bad shape. But I got him to the front door of this medical deal, and some other German soldiers came out and saw him and were saying mercy, 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 thanks to me in French, and they seemed pleasant enough. And so as they were taking him into the door to this medical place, I started walking back down. I started pedaling back down the road that we had come up to this hospital thing on, and I heard one of them say, "Hey," just like we'd say, "Hey," and I all but froze in my tracks and didn't know just what. And I turned around, and one of them was motioning me to come back, and I thought, "Oh hell, what now?" So I went back, and he handed me 4 or 5 cigarettes and a half of a chocolate bar, saying, "Mercy, mercy." And so that was that situation. I was, other than being startled, I was all right.
Well, it's just so.
But in the meantime, he had gotten cigarettes and the chocolate off of an American soldier. I knew, I could tell that. You know.
So
that's where he got them.
Oh, it was an American cigarette, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It just seems like you're very fortunate through this whole evasion deal, because, I mean, if circumstances had been just a little bit different, or somebody had been just a little bit more suspicious or something, or a little bit more efficient speaking French, or if you would have just tripped up and made one mistake, I mean,
exactly.
Quite likely you wouldn't be sitting here today. I mean, you truly are a very lucky person. There's no question about that.
There's a lot of luck involved in this, and I have always said, I guess a braggadocio way, that good old American ingenuity type of thing.
Well, you made a lot of your own luck too. That's right, through that ingenuity. Okay, so basically, you're shot down. Okay, June the 13th. This is like 6 or 7 days right after D-Day. And approximately how many days now is it taking you to get back before you finally run into the British? Is this like a 5 or 6 day trip? Do you remember?
Right at that. I didn't keep too much track of the time. Of course, I knew approximately what time of day it was, pretty much by the sun type of thing. Sunrise early in the morning, sunset the afternoon. I knew those kind of things. But shortly after this incident with the German soldier, I again saw up above a couple of more German soldiers walking toward me. And I didn't slow down or speed up or anything. I just kept going until I got right close to them, and they stopped me, and immediately they yanked at my bicycle, meaning I got it that they were going to take my bicycle, and so I yanked back, and they yanked further, and then they started searching me, patting me down again, and one of them reached up in here and felt all around to, I guess, see if I had any kind of a weapon on me and so forth. And luck was with me, because that's where we usually wore our dog tags, but I didn't have mine in that door, but we just...
That's fine. Okay, so you said he was searching like around your neck or something like that, and you were fortunate in some respect?
I was fortunate because that's where we usually all wore our dog tags, around our neck. But I had left my dog tags with the French.
Yeah, which would have been a dead giveaway. I mean,
yes, had they discovered my dog tags, that in itself would have been a dead giveaway.
What do you think would have happened if you think that they would have taken you a prisoner of war if you had the dog tags? Have you ever thought about that at all? Or?
Well, I'm sure they would have. Of course, anybody evading like that would be subject to be shot on sight, so to speak, if they had thought bad of it.
Which I suspect they would have done if they had found out you were an American anyway. I mean, without the ID.
Very possible.
Yeah. So this is about a 5 or 6 day trek. I mean, how many miles basically are we talking about that you were? I mean, obviously they took the bicycle away from you. Most of the trip you were on the bicycle, then you're on foot, and then you make it back to the British lines, and you meet the British soldiers, the Tommies there. How many miles did you traverse there?
Roughly 200 miles.
That's a pretty good trip. Pretty good trip. I imagine it's kind of a welter of confusion, the time. you're losing track of the time, just and concentrating on survival most of the time?
That, and of course, that was my bicycle trip through Europe that a lot of people think about.
Under different circumstances.
Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
Than a normal would do. Okay, so you finally reached these Tommies, and what do they say? Or
I came to. I'm now without a bicycle.
right.
So I'm walking in fairly decent country. It was a fairly open, not a lot of trees, fairly open country, and I was walking down the road, and every now and then there were German troop movements like on the road, and their heavy guns would be mounted out in some of the fields. And I noticed as I was still walking, I noticed two fellows on the right side of the road in a field, and one of them had a horse and plow, and they were doing a little plowing, and like they were helping each other. And I had to walk right back. We'll make way for him to get in here without any trouble, would you?
Oh, okay.
But that was the plumber, wasn't it? The countywide.
So you saw somebody out in the field? Or?
Okay, and they saw me, and they were sort of. I noticed they were sort of eyeballing me, and I was pretty much like eyeballing them back. And when I got right up to where one was leaning against the fence post while the other one had the plow, and he spoke, "Bonjour, monsieur." I did the same, and the other one got off his horse and came over there, and they started talking, and I could tell they were. I could sense that they were friendly, that they were not out to do me any harm, and I told them what I was trying to do, and they ooh and ahed about that, and in the meantime, I was hearing the British guns quite a lot, which I determined that was at Caen. I was headed toward Caen. And they told me to keep on walking, and I would come to an intersection in the road where there were some knocked out British vehicles, and that I should go to the right on that road and keep walking, and that the British soldiers were not too far down this particular road. Near all of this, near a little town of Thury Harcourt, something like that. So I thanked and left them, and then I found the intersection with the knocked out British vehicles, a couple of tanks, and it was just like what we'd call a dirt road, a one-lane dirt road with two tracks, left and right wheels of vehicles. So I started walking, and it suddenly scared the devil out of me when I discovered I was smart enough or whatever to know there was a couple of around these British tanks and vehicles. They had been knocked out by running over mines. I could tell that, and I could see some mines in the road that had been planted in the road, and I'd sidestep to avoid what I thought might be a mine, and thought to myself, well, this sure must look funny, dirty French farmer out going down the road, sidestepping here and over there, and I came to an intersection in the road, and in the it was a hedgerow type intersection, and these boys, which had told me the British would be about as far as I'd gone down this road, and sure enough, I could see the British, the Tommies. I could see their helmets over the hedgerow, and they all had their guns, and there wasn't any firing going on at this time. But when they saw me at this intersection, two of them came up to me and pointed the guns at me, and I held my hands up, which was a natural reflex, I suppose. And they started asking me questions in English, which of course I understood. And so finally I told them who I was and where I was going, and that I would like to be taken to their headquarters for this particular outfit. And they didn't believe me. They pointed the guns a little further and act like they didn't believe me. But finally, a sergeant came up, and he was in a vehicle, and the British soldiers put me in some kind of just a little lean-to like built on the side of the road. They were having their tea. Hot tea. They offered me some. I accepted, and it felt pretty good drinking it. And the sergeant came back with a British officer, and they put me in their vehicle and took me to their headquarters. And this is where I made contact, and they couldn't believe it. I had somewhat of a hard time explaining to them that I was American.
But you had luck again.
But they did. God damn this phone. Hello.
You're taken before some British officers, and you have to prove who you are is what you have to do, right? And you don't have any papers, so
well, I had my French identity card, and they agreed that it was my picture on the card. I say card on the identity papers I had. And so one of them went off, said, "Go get Major so-and-so," whatever his name was. It was an American name, Smith Jones. And pretty soon in comes this this American major. That was somewhat like a liaison with the British. Mm-hmm. And they start getting him to talk to me and trying to bring out, they kept saying this French, how did they say, this French
farmer, peasant, or
I think French peasant, this fool, trying to tell us he's shot down an American aviator. And the major kind of looked at me and looked back to them and said, "Well, he might be." And we started talking and questioning me. And he asked me such questions as where I was from, Houston, Texas, and he started talking sports. And what college did you go to? Texas A&M. He kind of looked right about that, and then he started asking me about a few of A&M scores, and the main one was the New Year's Day game that A&M played Tulane in New Orleans, January the 1st of 1940, and I was there at the game, but for the life of me I couldn't think of the score, which I think he was trying to bring out of me, but I just could not remember the score, and I told him that. And he asked me several questions that I would answer, but what I call the censure question that that he asked me. He said, do you know what, said, one of the large cities in Texas, he didn't say, one of the large cities in Texas has an animal on top of the building. Would you know what that might be? And I said, do you mean the flying red horse on top of the mobile building in Dallas? He said, that's exactly what I mean. And then the British were looking a little more sedate and more normal, and so the major starts in. He said, well, hell, he's got to be an American. Said, I'm from Dallas, and I went to A&M. We had earlier talked a little bit about A&M, and what barracks did I have at A&M? Law Hall. I knew where that was. I knew where Puryear Hall was, and so the British all were relaxed then, and one of them opens a drawer and brings out a bottle of scotch, and that's all passed around, and the British are patting me on the back saying, good show, good show, good show.
I think somewhere in that conversation too you made mention of the fact that A&M had won the conference like
2 years in a row.
Right, so that
38 and 39.
That's further proof. And I think you said that
Southwest Conference.
In your book, not to embarrass you, but I think you said you didn't remember too much about that game that you had attended on New Year's Day because you had imbibed quite a few slow gin fizzes or something.
Got sick on slow gin in New Orleans.
But anyway.
Because a lot of A&M alumni were in New Orleans, for this game. And my roommate and I had hitchhiked over there. And any bar you went in, put your foot on the rail, there was an Aggie alumni there to buy your drink. Type of thing,
So you weren't wanting for any drinks on that particular trip. Well, so you prove this basically, and then it's my understanding that they flew you back to England in a hospital type aircraft or something like that. You get back over there, and no sooner do you get back than you have to make a trip to London and file an escape and evasion report number 759, which was dated 20th of June 1944. Mm-hmm. So what's that? That's like 6 or 7 days after you were shot down.
Yeah.
And they were somebody you said is like a sharp, bald-headed, officious kind of guy, chastised you and said something about you had done wrong. For example, you shouldn't got rid of your dog tags. You took the wrong evasion route, that you should have gone through the Pyrenees instead of going through France, and that was kind of a surprise to you, was it not, that they would chastise you?
And also for doing away with my GI shoes.
But
those GI shoes that we most of us wore were like old clodhopper shoes.
Well, you didn't have the most comfortable of shoes on this trek back to freedom, but the thought occurred to me, if you're wearing American GI shoes, it would have been a dead giveaway.
Exactly. I pointed this out to them. See?
And he didn't see your logic, or?
No, he sent me off on a tour to a lot of the bases in England to tell my story.
That's why this was the Jack Ilfrey lecture tour.
Yeah, which I enjoyed. Met friends and people I had known before, type of thing.
And you were surprised too, because generally after you had been shot down and you had evaded, escape and evasion or something like that, generally you were either returned to the States or you didn't report back to combat. But you did actually report back to combat, and you were promoted to major in late June of 1944. And you celebrated this incident, which led to some problems somewhat. Would you want to talk about that, or is it too sensitive a matter?
No. It's
in your book on page 83, it lists
it's somewhat unbelievable. There's no lying or getting around the bush. I I had been operations officer of the 79th Squadron, and I was promoted to major, and was the full CO, commanding officer of the squadron at this time. So as usual, when people got promotions, there'd be a celebration at our officers' club. In this particular case, 3 or 4 of my fellows, mostly my flight leaders in the 79th Squadron, and I decided to go into the larger town of Peterborough, just to the east of Kingscliff. And I was assigned a Jeep for my use, and we loaded up the Jeep and took off and went on into Peterborough. And made the rounds there of some of their pubs and clubs, and had a fair amount of drinks on me. And about dusk, it didn't get dark over there. That was another thing back in France. It didn't get dark till later at night, but in England it was the same way. We started back around dusk, and there was a Jeep with 3 or 4 MPs in it. Started to stop us on the road back to Kingscliff, and I just kept the Jeep going, speeded up a little bit until the Jeep finally had to build up speed and come up beside of us and order us to pull over, which we did. And they got us to get out of the Jeep, and I was arguing with the MPs, trying to let us go back to our base, is where we were headed. We were due back on the base, and there was some arguing going on, and the MPs were acting toughish. They had their pistols, and I had one young lieutenant with me. Well, I had several lieutenants, but one of them was somewhat of the pugilistic type. He had been a boxer, a very good pilot, but in his civilian life had been a boxer of some kind. He came up to one of the MPs and used his fist and just, wow, knocked this MP right in the face, and the MP fell down on the street, and the other MP put his gun on us, and they called for some reinforcements, and it came with more MPs, and they took us into the jail in Peterborough, and the next thing we heard was like the clink of a jail cell door going shut. So the next morning we were allowed to go back to base, and I knew that close behind us would be the report about this. I was the major in charge, that there'd be an MP report that went to Eisenhower's headquarters, back up to our fighter command headquarters, onto my CO, and sure enough, that's what happened. And
this was Cy Wilson, Colonel Cy Wilson.
Yes, uh-huh.
And I take it he wasn't amused.
Well, no, but he always had good thoughts of me. He always liked me, Cy Wilson. But he had this report on his desk that he was reading, and it seemed like I was, the MPs had charged me on several accounts. I don't know if I can get them in chronological order or not, but one was court-martial, resigned from the service. Oh, no, the charges were unauthorized trip with my Jeep, going off the base without permission, without a pass, going through the guard gate and without stopping, and being arrested in Peterborough, was charged for overloaded Jeep, speeding, and
urinating on the street.
Well, it wasn't me. One of the boys that was with me.
So these were the charges?
Those were the charges, and I was given the choice of resigning or court-martial. They had one charge in there. I could be demoted. I forgot the nomenclature, just how that reads. I could be demoted in rank, and
what we call busted.
Yeah, okay. And that's the one I took. I was demoted to a second lieutenant, and have always said my claim to fame or infamy is that I was a second lieutenant commanding officer of a combat fighter squadron during the war. I don't know of any others.
So you were basically, within a very short period of time, you were promoted to major and then busted to a second lieutenant. And then you made your way back up to, did you make it back up to captain?
Yes.
Eventually?
Yeah, made it back to captain.
But you did make it back. I mean, you were still the commanding officer
yes,
of the 79th Fighter Squadron of the 20th Fighter Group. And that was basically, you and Cy Wilson had gone to 8th Air Force Headquarters to see Doolittle.
Yes,
And I guess they were just lenient with you, and it worked out okay.
Well, that's just about all there was to it. I never heard much of anything more. Just went on about my daily duties of leading squadron in combat.
And during the course of the conversation, I think you said with Doolittle, when you told him his name, you thought, well, his mind was working there, and he probably remembered that international incident in Portugal, which he had something to do with at that time.
Yeah, that's what happened. The way he was looking at me, and she said, Ilfrey, where have I heard that name before? And it dawned on me, he knew it from when I was under his command. I had landed in Portugal, causing this international incident.
Well, before we commence with the chronology here of the kind of your adventures, let's jump ahead from the time of the book, 39 years. I think this was a very interesting thing. You made a trip back to France, and you visited these places. You visited the people that helped you.
Yes,
You were interviewed by French TV. That must have been a very rewarding time for you.
Well, it was, and everywhere we went, were taken in France, I was somewhat surprised how the French attitude was very, very strong for Americans. They really showed appreciation for for Americans for liberating their country from the Germans during World War II.
And that's odd, because the stereotype is among most tourists that the French are very rude and that kind of thing. But you never picked up on that at all.
No, not at all.
They were all very, very friendly.
Yes.
And I understand that when you went back and you saw these people, you actually went to the farmhouse, and they had used your armor plating as a reflecting type of a device in their fireplace. They still had that. Is that true?
Yes.
And some of the things that you had left behind, they had, for example, your watch, your gloves, your fountain pen, and your maps. And do you have any of those items with you to this day?
Yes, I do. I have a fountain pen and the gloves. the maps I took to one of our reunions and let where they were having an auction, silent auction, is that
something like that?
and the map was auctioned off, and the funds of course went to the unit that was putting on the reunion. But I still have the gloves and the fountain pen.
And did you tell me your mother had given you that? It was
This was one of those Parker white dot pens my mother had given me at high school graduation.
Now, did they or did you return some of the francs that you had in your possession at that time?
Well, I think I pointed out that the francs I had on my in my escape kit, that they saw those, and I gave the francs when I was leaving France to make my evasion. Gave them these francs because they said they were like brand new francs, and they in turn gave me some old francs,
right,
to use on the road. But surprisingly, in 200 miles, I never spent a dime.
There's something else I wanted to talk about, and this oh yes, was it Jean? He had a son, and he named his son after you.
Yes,
and he tried to hook up with you, I think, one time in the States, and was unsuccessful, or was he successful? Jack. Is he the professor?
Jean.
Okay, Jean.
Yeah, is the college professor in Angers. And his first son, this is after the war, he named him after me. And I have visited with them, and the son, Jack, has been over here visiting with me.
Now, of course, you didn't realize this until you had gone back like 39 years later. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
That must have been very touching to have a son named
Well,
after
it
you.
was.
It just had to be. Well, I don't want to cut that short, but people can pick up on that in your book, because that's an interesting reunion that you had with those people, and you saw the site where your plane had crashed.
Yes,
and that kind of thing. And you had gone on your lecture tour. Right now you're returning to combat, and now you're changing. It's my understanding that all the P-47s and the P-38s are going to be used in a tactical capacity with the 9th Air Force, and y'all are switching over to the new P-51 Mustang.
Yes. We were fully equipped with the P-51D.
So now you've got a new Happy Jack Go Buggy. You've got the same name for your aircraft.
Right.
And I know from previous conversations that the P-38 obviously was your favorite, and you said that about 75% of all the missions that you flew were in the P-38, only about 25% were in the P-51. But in what respect was the P-51 superior to the P-38?
Well,
I know it's hard for you to admit.
No, well, in a way, yes, because I was so used to and dearly loved the P-38. The P-51 was faster than the P-38 in level flight, for example. It had longer range with the belly tank. It was equipped with belly tanks and had a longer range than the P-38. I didn't want to change, but after I did, I quite quickly learned that the P-51 was one darn good little fighter.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because the consensus among, most people who are knowledgeable about the war, and they talk about it, they say basically that the P-51 was the premier fighter in the Second World War. But I know it's just hard for you to get over your affinity and love for the P-38 because you were brought up with it.
Well, there wasn't much wrong with the ME-109.
That's a pretty good plane too.
Yes.
Okay, and I want to go on here, jump ahead just a little bit here, and this was another interesting story, you might say, in the varied career of Jack Ilfrey. This was when you were CO of the 79th Fighter Squadron, and according to the King's Cliff Book, this was mission 213, the 20th of November 1944. This is just about a month before you go back to the States after your second tour. There was an escort of P-38s that flew along with these photo reconnaissance F-5s to Berlin. And your wingman, if I remember, was Dwayne Kelson. And on the way back, there was an incident I'd like for you to go into. That's Lieutenant Dwayne Kelson.
Yes,
But y'all were going back, and you were over. Was it Holland or Belgium or somewhere?
As we finished our mission escorting these, we call them Photo Joes, P-38s, that were taking pictures over Berlin, we were their escort in that area. As we were coming back, my wingman Kelso was fired on and hit in his glycol system, press zone, and started putting out white smoke. I haven't been through this before.
Not on this part.
Okay.
I mean, we've talked about it, but I want to get it on tape.
All right.
So some of this may seem repetitious, but
so I was leading our flight back home, and we came upon Maastricht, Holland, and which was still in German hands, and they started firing at us, and we were going on through into Belgium, heading back towards the English Channel in England, and I spied what looked like to be a little auxiliary grass field down close to where we were, and I pointed it out to Kelso. It had what looked like a couple of wrecked airplanes on it and a couple of little buildings. I pointed it out to him and told him to try to make for it and to land, and that if he thought he could land with his wheels down, to use his own judgment, and if he could land with his wheels down, I would circle around and try to pick him up. And I saw him land. I saw him hit some pretty rough holes, bounce the P-38 around a little bit. It was fairly muddy. It was slinging a lot of mud around, and I circled around, and he pulled the nose of his P-51 up in towards some bushes and trees, and got out of it. And I circled around and saw what he had done, and I prepared to land, and which I did without much difficulty. It was a rough landing because of the terrain, the nature of the terrain. And I pulled up to where he had parked his P-51, and I opened the canopy and jumped out on the wing and threw off my parachute, my Mae West life vest and parachute, and he got in and then got back and sat in the cockpit. Kelso climbed in and tried to sit in my lap, and I realized right away that four legs in the cockpit, like they were not gonna somewhat hinder my trying to take off and land the P-51. So I stood up, and he sat back down in the seat, and then I sat on his knees, which pushed me up pretty high into the top of the canopy, and we were fairly well jammed in there. And I had never killed the motor, so the motor was going, and I gave it gasoline power and turned the airplane around and took off. And we flew about 20 minutes to Brussels and spent the night there. Of course, that had been tried quite often in the 8th Air Force, and planes and pilots were lost, and they had put a stop to us doing this. But this,
you weren't going to leave him.
This fellow Kelson was he'd been my wingman for a long time. He would, I know he would have followed me anywhere, and I had sorrowful feelings of leaving him there, so this is why I did it and took the consequences later.
They weren't dire consequences, though. You didn't.
No.
You didn't get in too much trouble for that.
No.
Okay, and another time, it's not necessary to go into a great deal of detail, but I thought this was interesting too, that y'all flew a ferry mission, I think, all the way to Russia, and came back by way of Italy, stopped there for a while, and then even came back to Paris for a very short-lived stay, I think 4 or 5 hours or something, while they were working on your planes, and then you went back to England. Anything that you remember about that trip to Italy? Is it Foggia or Foggia or whatever they call that air base there that y'all went to?
Yeah, Foggia.
Foggia.
Now, this was a series of what was known as the Shuttle missions. Fighters escorting bombers from England into Russia. We were shuttle mission number 6, and we took off from England, and our bombers dropped some supplies to the Polish, who at this time were in the middle of their Polish uprisings. And then we flew on, and we fighters, the bombers landed at a base in the Ukraine, Poltava, and we fighters were over at another base, Mirigard. We stayed approximately 2 days, as we were supposed to fly missions out of Russia against the Germans, but we never did. We flew a mission from the Ukraine. The mission wound up in Foggia, Italy, with the bombers bombing en route there.
Did you run into any old buddies there at Foggia or nearby?
Yes. My crew chief was there. This is where my 94th Squadron, 1st Fighter Group, was now stationed with their P-38.
Okay, so I mean, you had
ran into a lot, not so much of the pilots, but the enlisted men who knew me, and I knew most of them.
So you stayed at Foggia for just a little while, and then you took off for Paris.
Well, no, let me see here. We were to take off from Foggia, which was Italy, and bomb an airfield in France. I can't say the name right now, but my P-51 started missing, cutting out, and acting up, and I went into Orly Airport in Paris, where it was eventually repaired enough for me to get it back to Kingscliff.
And you had enough time to go into Paris. I mean, it wasn't a long visit.
No, just briefly into Paris.
Not enough to really enjoy the life or the sights that much, I guess.
Well, the type of thing I can say I've been there.
Some kind of impressions that you got of the Russians. Apparently, it was not.
Well, our government, through Henry Stimson, who was Roosevelt's
I think he was Secretary of War. I'm not sure.
Secretary of War, was trying to establish bases in western Russia that we could use and use our B-29s to bomb in Japan. Negotiations went on and on before they could finally get the Russians to agree to this. When we flew into all of our B-17s, landed at Poltava in southern Ukraine, and fighter pilots, us P-51s, were in close, and when we first landed, they sent out all kinds of troops and guards to guard our airplanes, and they went over them, examining our planes very closely, but they would not let us look at any of their airplanes that were parked there, which of course were our P-39s and our C-47s. And the Germans came over at night, dropped a lot of flares over Poltava, and severely bombed the field, knocking out most all of our B-17s and killing quite a few of our personnel. And they would not let us take off to try to intercept the Germans doing this.
Any reason why? I mean, why the suspicion? Why this?
Well, we don't. That was all part of it, and later on, we all of us called it the start of the Cold War.
So ostensibly, I mean, this is supposed to be some kind of cooperative effort between the United States and the Soviet government, and the whole damn thing just backfired. They were suspicious of you guys. They were wary of you.
Yes.
I mean, they treated you like spies or something like that the whole time that you were there. I mean, could you travel around without escort or while you were there? I know y'all went out to a swimming hole or something like that.
Well, we commandeered a Jeep and went off the base. Wasn't supposed to, but went off the base and went into the little town of Poltava. Wasn't too much to see, but everywhere we went, we saw a whole bunch of kids, and we gave them coins and things we might have had in our pockets. I have some pictures of this in
they were
my
in your
book.
book. The kids were probably fascinated and innocent about it.
Right.
But I don't understand the mentality. Why did they allow the destruction of the B-17s and not allow you guys to intercept? I mean, because if you had done that, it would have made them look foolish or incompetent, or, I mean, you have any idea what that's all about?
No, we don't know. That book I just showed you, the Poltava Affair, really tells the complete story of this instance.
Yeah, this is by Glenn B. Infield, the Poltava Affair, a Russian warning, an American tragedy, and a subtitle, a minute-by-minute account of the secret World War II operation that foreshadowed the Cold War. So it was really a fiasco.
Yeah.
Just didn't work out at all.
That's a good word for it.
Well, anyway, you went back through Foggia and then Paris and then you're back to England. A question about another in your book that I found somewhat fascinating, and I hope this is not too risque, but at one particular time you were talking about you were flying at altitude and you had some type of a catheter, a tube-like device that you could use to go to the restroom, and this led to an interesting series of events, and I was wondering if you might go into that a little bit.
Well, of course, we found it pretty cold on some of these escort missions up 35,000 feet. I've seen 55, 60 below zero on my thermometer. So of course we had to dress as warm as possible. The P-38 was had a nickname of the icebox because it had very poor heating. The models we flew had very, very poor, practically non-existent heating. Later, the P-51s did have a much better heating system. But getting ready for the mission, I would wear some long john underwear. Early on, I had written my mother to please send me a set, and she did. I would put on these long johns, and then I would put on my regular pink or green pants with my pink or green shirt, a regular uniform. I had bought somewhere an English wool pullover sweater. I wore that. Then over that, I put my flight coveralls on. Pictures of me in the coveralls. And so, when it came time to the cold, a lot of times the cold weather would bring on that you would bring on where you needed to relieve yourself.
The urge, more or less.
The urge, yes, beneath our seat was what was known as a relief tube. They pull it out, and then you'd use it, you know, to urinate into, and it would go out under the bottom of the airplane. But in that kind of temperature, and with all those clothes on, it took a little patience and a while to open up things and dig in down and everything, and of course, quite often due to the cold weather, it was sometimes hard to find. But when you did, you used your relief tube. What happened to me one day is we were flying along up there over Germany, I think somewhere, when somebody over the radio yelled at me, said, "Jack, there's some 190s coming in at 4 o'clock on us." And I turned and looked, and I could see them. I couldn't determine right away if they were 190s or 109s, but I saw the flashing of the cannons. And I was right in the middle of using the relief tube, and it must have been quite often they were somewhat stopped up, or from where you were in your seat down below, that was subject to freezing in those kind of temperatures. So I had my cup full in my hand, and it wasn't draining out very good at all. And when those German planes came in from 4 o'clock, I was holding the cup, not knowing exactly what to do with it. Some of them said they just poured it on the floor. I heard others say they poured it down their boots. But I was sitting there just holding it when these Germans came in on us, and my yoke stick in the yoke or yoke in the P-38. I gave it, I pushed it forward and turned so as to make a left-hand dive, which was my intentions were, and that negative pressure that I gave my yoke, all that I was holding here in the cup flew up all over the windshield and promptly froze. So there I had to get glove off in a hurry and
Scraping the frozen urine off the windshield.
scrape a place where I could see out.
We had left off Tuesday, and this is the tape 4, the concluding part of tape 4 of the Jack Ilfrey tapes. And we're pretty well finished Jack's career as chronicled in his book, Happy Jack's Go Buggy. And I kind of want to go over a summation or a summary of his battle participation. And Jack, if I'm correct, in the Mediterranean Theater of Operations, you earned 5 DFCs and 4 air medals. In the European Theater of Operations, you got a DFC and 10 air medals. And just for the sake of clarification, wasn't the first air medal for that flight over the North Atlantic to England? In the first instance, y'all got a special commendation air medal for that one, that treacherous trip?
Yes, all the pilots in the first fighter group, that was the 3 squadrons that made that flying our P-38 solo across the North Atlantic, the Bolero mission.
Right. That was the one with Presque Isle to Goose Bay, to Bluey West, what was it?
Bluey West 1 and West 8 in Greenland.
Right.
And then Reykjavik, and then on to
Prestwick, and then down to Curtin and Lindsay and so on. That was the first air medal.
Yeah.
In addition to which, you earned a Silver Star, and you were entitled to wear the European and African Theater ribbons with, if I'm not mistaken, 6 Bronze Stars. Is that correct?
That sounds like the way it read.
Okay. Well, I know you're modest about such
Bronze
things.
Stars meant the time, sort of like.
Okay, and in summing up on this, the hours flown, you actually flew more hours in the European theater than you in the Mediterranean. Your total for the European Theater of Operations, the ETO, was 320 hours. In the Mediterranean, the MTO, was 208 hours. You flew 70 missions in Europe and 72 in North Africa, which made a total of 142 missions, combat missions. The total hours combining both theaters would be 528 hours. And you also stated that 75% of those missions were flown, this is approximately, in the P-38, and the balance would be in the P-51.
That's
correct. And you were formally discharged from the service in September, I think, of 1945. And that pretty well concluded your military career. Now, just briefly, could you tell me more or less what you did upon your return to the United States when you left the service? I understand that you were a commercial pilot. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Well, I was already in the United States. I was stationed up at McCord Field, Tacoma, Washington, when I came down to Fort Sam Houston for discharge. And then after that, I went back to Houston, thinking about perhaps going to work down there. And then a real good friend of mine at A&M and in cadet flying school, Jack Landers, got me on with the same type of job he had. He got me connected with Dunn Brothers Pipeline Construction pipeline stringing company in Dallas.
Okay.
And they first bought a little Evasion, with a civilian aircraft made by North American out in California, with similar. It was a 4 passengers, but had similar looks of the P-51 that North American had also made. And I flew that around to the different jobs they would have. I'd fly them to certain cities where they would bid on these pipeline jobs. And then they talked about a little larger airplane, and through my connection with John Landers, he had gotten was working for O.R. Smith Company out of Fort Worth, in the same type of business that my people, the Dunn brothers, were. And I went up to Wichita, Kansas, the Beechcraft Company at Wichita, Kansas, and bought a brand new C-45, was the government designation, or the Army Air Corps designation, C-45, which was actually a Twin Beech D-18. I bought it brand new for, I believe, around $3,500. This was a surplus market after the war. And then I took it down to Spartan Aircraft at Tulsa, Oklahoma, and had it converted into a commercial executive type aircraft. 7 passengers, a restroom on it, and seats and tables that folded up and down, and a wet bar, and used that then for several years.
And then what made you cease doing this? Because I know eventually you came to San Antonio, and it's simply as a kind of a stopgap measure, you thought you were going to do a little work here, and then you ended up the rest of your career as an officer with the Alamo National Bank. Could you tell me why you got out of commercial aviation? What was the thing that led to that?
Well, actually, in flying them around, I was on the road, you might say, or gone quite a lot, and it had that in itself had a lot to do with the breakup of my marriage.
Okay.
And I just happened to be in San Antonio visiting a couple of college friends of mine here, and I saw in the paper that a local bank was looking for an ex-military people, and it was Alamo National Bank of San Antonio, and I walked in to see them perhaps I walked in somewhat to see about a stopgap job type of thing, and I stayed 30 years.
As an officer?
Yes.
Now was, am I correct, was General Simpson of the United States 9th Army in World War II, was he an employee of that bank?
General Simpson at that time had been an employee of Alamo National Bank as its military officer.
Okay.
And when I came, they were halfway looking for somebody to work sort of for and with him. And they felt like, and I felt like, that I was the one for that particular job. I liked that job. General Simpson was well, he had been a great commander, 9th Army, under Eisenhower in Europe. And he and his wife lived here in San Antonio. And I helped him in setting up loans and things like that for the military in San Antonio.
Am I correct, or if my memory serves, did not General Simpson, he wrote a kind of a nice blurb for the first edition of your book from Exposition Press in 1979?
Yes, he did. This was after I had quit work at Alamo, I believe, and he wrote a nice acclaim for my book.
That was very good of him.
Mm-hmm.
And something else that I've talked to you previously about, but not over this tape, is that you obviously enjoyed this job very much. You were there a long time. You never found it boring or mundane, but I asked you once while you were sitting at that desk if you ever more or less reminisced or wish you were back in the air flying airplanes and not sitting behind the desk. Could you address that for the tape here?
Well, now, I did for a couple of years along around that time, took a job as an instructor out at Hondo. That put me back into military type flying, teaching young cadets, predominantly foreign students. I had some French, Belgian, Dutch students, teaching them how to fly the AT-6. Our primary Army Air Corps trainer at that time.
But your after-war career, you never really looked upon it with any regrets, like, and more or less kind of pine for the adventure and the camaraderie and the fellowship of the guys and in the war and what y'all went through. I mean, basically, you're just starting a new life and you're putting that behind you. Is that correct?
Well, that's pretty much how it worked, type of thing. I occasionally would meet and visit with some of the people I had been with during the war.
Well, the only reason I bring this up is one time I read in a book, Minority Report by H.L. Mencken, who was kind of a famous essayist and newspaper man, and he ventured the opinion that he said that once a military man comes back to civilian life, you know, that he would find it tedious and there'd be a lack of excitement, and he just wouldn't enjoy getting back to civilian life. But apparently that's just not true with you at all. I mean, you were glad to have that behind you and start a new aspect or phase of your life.
Well, yes, I think I can say it that way. Of course, in the process of living here and being out at Hondo, I met my longtime friend Woody Wilkinson, and we had a little business of our own for many years. So
you never really lost touch with all of this, maybe for a while, but even later on we'll get into it.
The reunions started, and I've been faithfully going to those for many years, and you get back with the fellows that you flew with. The 8th Air Force has had a large membership, 8th Air Force Historical Society, and they meet every year. And our 20th Fighter Group started meeting with them, and then we branched off to meet by ourselves.
All right, and then I know that you are you still the editor of King's Cliff Remembered? Is that correct?
Yes,
Could you tell us a little bit about that newsletter, the fascinating reminiscences about the 20th Fighter Group? When was the origin of it, and how did it get started?
Well, it started back in the early 80s, I'd say. I started this newsletter for the 20th Fighter Group. King's Cliff Remembered, the name of it. I've been putting it out quarterly, more or less, for quite a few years. And of course, a lot of the material that I print comes to me from other 20th Fighter Group people. I've every one of our 20th Fighter Group people that was shot down and either evaded or was captured and served in German POW camp, I have all of their first-person stories in the book.
How many subscribers do you know off the kind of, could you take a guess to your newsletter?
I mail out around 1,200 copies each issue.
That many? Oh.
The people who subscribe and pay dues to the organization is the funds that help pay for and keep the magazine going.
I know it's highly regarded too, because I think Lynn Dayton, the famous novelist and also military historian, and I think Roger Freeman have sang your praises for the job that you do, and they find it very illuminating and rewarding reading. Both of these men are military historians, and they praise it very highly. Could you tell me, so you're a member of the 20th Fighter Group, any other, I mean, you're also a member of the ACES. Could you tell me other groups that you belong to and that you meet with periodically?
My first group, the 94th Hat in the Ring Squadron, was a squadron in the 1st Fighter Group, and they meet once a year.
Okay. That was Africa.
And then, yes, and then I'm a member of the, I'm a member of the American Escape and Evasion Society. Those of us who were shot down and evaded,
okay,
which I did. And that we have a pretty large group, and we try to meet once a year, and they put out a good newsletter. Naturally, a group of that category has a lot of stories from the men, you know, who actually escaped or evaded capture.
I've noticed too, and you've told me this in the past, that through the newsletter and also rekindling associations with these people at various reunions, you got some glimpses into some facts that you didn't know at the time, like 40 or 50 years ago. I mean,
yes, that's true.
And could you give an example? I mean, I know this is kind of quick and sudden, and perhaps you can't remember it, but I remember there was one episode where you found out. Oh, it was about the cables. Maybe we're repeating ourselves, but that's okay. But it was the cable repair or something in the left boom in North Africa, and somebody told you at one of the conventions that they had jerry-rigged this thing, and you were flying it.
Well, yes, the day down in North Africa, when I brought the P-38 back after being somewhat severely damaged, and I did not learn this, and after 40 to 50 years, through my crew chief and his men, and some of the mechanics and so forth that were on the base that repaired that airplane. And they in telling me about it, it seemed like they repaired until they got to the cables in the left boom, the cables that went to all the different controls, that they didn't have new replacement cables to put in there, so they used the ones that were there that had been damaged, repairing them the best they can. And when it came time for the cable to be stretched from where it fastens into the body of the P-38, goes through the left boom, they had a hard time stretching it to where it was supposed to fit. They used a Jeep and a tractor to try to stretch that cable to make it fit, which they did. And then the CO of the squadron, Glenn Hubbard, at that time, told them to get me and to give it a test flight. but at that time also the repair crew told him how they had to, what you might call, jerry-rig the cables in the boom, and that they couldn't stand by that 100% of it being steady or sturdy, that it might want to break again or pull loose. And he made the remark, he said, well, said, that damn fool's going to kill himself anyway, let him test it.
We may have talked about this earlier, but it's not going to hurt anything. I mean, but I thought that was interesting because you found all this out many years after the fact, and I'm sure these stories come up and y'all talk over old times, and you get a new insight into something.
That's how this one came up.
All right, then,
and I think I have that in the book somewhere.
Yes, it is mentioned.
And a picture of them working on it.
Yes, sir.
They're in North Africa, at the place this one place we were stationed, Yux-La-Bain, was very muddy, and they had they repaired that P-38 under very adverse conditions and lack of proper tools and parts.
I'm going to get into that the living conditions a little bit more thoroughly in our last tape, because apparently they weren't the best in the world. All right, now one other group that you belong to, of course, is the American Fighter Aces Association. Do y'all meet once a year, or how does that work out?
The Aces Association meets once a year.
And I want to point something else, because some people say there's this term aceosity or something. Why are people so obsessed with aces? And Olnick made the point in his book Stars and Bars. He said, well, if it's an important thing that you down enemy airplanes, then obviously those that down the most planes should get due recognition. Of course, I agree with that basis, so that's why I bring this up. I know you're not a martinet, you're not a braggart, but I want you to just briefly talk. We know an ace is someone who had a minimum of 5 victories. How many aces are in your association now? Do you have any idea?
Not a specific number. There's several hundred.
Still veterans of the Second World War that are still with us?
Yes,
Could you name some of the more prominent aces that you've met and associated with in your life?
Well, one in particular that I was quite fond of, I was under his command out in California toward the latter part of the war at Santa Rosa, was General J. Robbins.
Who unfortunately died, I think 2 days ago, did he?
Yes, two days ago I saw where he passed away, and it saddened me because he was such a fine man, a great leader.
And an alumnus of
Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. And if I read correctly in the newspaper, he is the top Texas ace of all time, like 22 or 23 victories. Does that sound right?
Well, he held the record for quite a few years of being Texas' top ace. I believe his total was 22 out in the South Pacific.
Now you also met, I think, of course, Gabby Gabreski.
Gabreski, of course, he's well known, and he comes to our reunions.
I think he was like third all time behind Bong, who is deceased, and McGuire, who died in I think 44 or 45.
I did not associate. I knew who they were, but there was not much of any association there.
But you have met, and you know Gabreski, and how about Robert Johnson and Hub Zemke? I think these were all the 56. Was it the 56th?
56th Fighter Group,
which racked up quite a few victories in P-47s.
Yes,
Yeah. Also in San Antonio, you know, of course, the legendary David Tex Hill of the American Volunteer Group.
Yes,
So he's a member. Any other ones offhand that that you know of? Any Navy aces? Did you ever meet Pappy Boyington in the Marine
Yes,
Corps?
I have met Pappy. The the aces consist of the Army, Navy, and Marine. Those three categories of aces.
Could you tell me, and again, I know these are just off the top of the head, you probably can't recall, but do we have many aces living here presently in San Antonio?
Yes, I right at the moment can't come up with the exact figure, but we are quite often called upon for different holidays, like July the 4th. 5 or 6 of us will be asked to go out to some high school and make an appearance and maybe talk a little bit in conjunction with their a military band and marching, ROTC, that type of thing.
And I understand the aces are going to meet this year in August, is that correct, in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I imagine you're looking forward to that.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to stop the tape right here, and we're going to kind of go into a portable mode, and I'm going to get you to show me some of the prints and books that have chronicled this book, Top Guns.
It is America's Fighter Aces Tell Their Story by Joe Foss, one of our well-known presently living ace.
And also
Matthew Brennan.
and Joe Foss was, if I'm not mistaken, he was a governor, I think, of either North or South Dakota, and he won the Congressional Medal of Honor, did he not?
Yes, that's right.
Was he Navy or Marine Corps?
He was
Or was he Army?
no, he was Navy or Marines. I'm not certain without going in here and looking it up, which I won't.
Okay. Now, and what this book contains is the excerpt from Happy Jack's Go Buggy that concerns the escape and evasion in France. Is that right?
That and the Portugal incident.
Oh, okay, that's right. Okay, now
And several other books have used some of my stuff, some of my stories and writings in this Happy Jack's Go Buggy book.
Okay, now could you show me that print there that you have on the table and explain what that one's all about?
Okay, now this is a print by Robert Carlin. He's well known for his watercolor aviation prints.
That's fine. And this commemorates your first victory, does it not, in North Africa? Could you just briefly go over what is happening there? And that's Newell Roberts, I think, and the other P-38?
Yes. This is my P-38, the Texas Terra, and my flight leader, Captain Newell Roberts. This is 94th Fighter Squadron when we were stationed at Biskra. We had gone off on a flight, I as his wingman had gone off on a flight near Gabes on the Mediterranean coast of southern Tunisia. And on our way coming back from there, we saw off to our 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock position, we saw two we identified them as ME-110s, and Roberts said, "Let's go, Jack, let's go get them." He pulled in behind the one on the right and successfully shot at it, and it crashed and exploded in the desert. I pulled in behind mine, which had been on the left, and it seemed to be no problem to get him in my sights and fire at him. The first time I had fired my P-38 guns, as I recall it, other than in some practice type of missions. But this was my first firing of my P-38 guns, 4 50 caliber and 1 20 millimeter cannon that were in the nodes of our P-38s.
And this was your first victory of your career?
This was June. No, this was
it's probably November, right?
I forgot. This was November the 29th of 1942.
Right.
Our first contact with the Germans.
And it was about a month later, on December the 26th, that you achieved your
Yes.
your A status.
Yes.
Go ahead.
As I was saying, the ME-110 that I shot at successfully skidded in on the desert. But before that happened, and as I was aiming and firing at him, I noticed some red-orange balls coming up toward me and passing me by, and suddenly realized, well, that was the tail gunner in this ME-110 shooting at me. First time I had fired my guns, and first time I had physically been shot at by another aircraft. I circled around and I saw the crew of 3 hurriedly get out and start running across the desert. And it kind of amused me. I thought, well, where do they think they're going? You know, out there in the middle. And I circled around and came in with my guns and set this ME-110 on fire. These 3 crewmen, one behind the other, are just running across the desert. And
It's not like they were going to find a sanctuary, huh?
I don't know where or how they would, but I turned and aimed at them. Had no intentions of firing at them to hurt them in any way, but as I was coming in behind them, I fired several spurts of my guns that came right alongside of them, and they all dropped to the desert and were doing this at me. I could see them, and it made me laugh. Thought, well, now they're still running like the devil. Fell down in the. But like I said, I had no intentions of harming them in any way.
Right. Okay, we're going to take a second here and get another print. Explain what this print is.
This print is called Dawn Chorus by Nicholas Trudgian, who's becoming quite well known for his aviation, an English artist who is becoming quite well known. It shows the 20th Fighter Group taking off from Kingscliff on its mission on D-Day, June the 6th, 1942. This P-38 is Wrangler. It was our Group CO, Colonel Cy Wilson's airplane, his P-38, and the others are following in behind him.
Okay. Now this one's signed by several aces. Is that not correct?
Yes. We had a signing of this Hub Zemke, Robin Olds, all aces. Robin Olds, Hub Zemke, Arthur Jeffrey, and myself.
If not mistaken, Mr. Olds served also in Korea and Vietnam, did he not? Robin Olds?
Yes, Robin Olds, I did.
Okay, yeah. This I think is a limited edition print. There was about 1,000 of those done, I believe. Do you have anything else to comment on that
I'm
one?
just going to comment about Trudgian's detail. In every print I've ever seen of his, he has quite a bit of detail. This is what he calls a sleepy English village. You can see our trucks, 3/4 ton trucks on the road. You can even spot the little the English red telephone booth sitting up here by this.
So it rings true to you, huh? It brings back
Yes,
some memories?
It does, of English countryside.
I imagine you had some pretty spectacular scenery from up there throughout your career. Okay, we'll get another print here now. We have now?
This is a print by C.S. Bailey, an artist out in Salt Lake City, and he uses what are the words for the type of painting?
Profile, maybe?
No, it's not watercolor, it's not oil, it's brush. What is it? Something brush?
Not acrylic, maybe?
No.
I'm not sure.
Something brush.
Airbrush.
Airbrush.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
He paints with airbrush. The P-38 and the German Me-109 were, of course, adversaries. And he has several of this type of print out with Navy, Marine fighters, and other Army Air Corps fighters.
And that is the Go Buggy. That's the last P-38 you flew.
Yes, this is the P-38J with the 79th serial number, 79th Squadron. O was my designated. And yellow nose cowling, well, typical for the 20th Fighter Group.
You also have your D-Day marks on there, it looks like, right underneath the wing. Looks like you got the black and white D-Day markings. And also on the bottom of the boom. How about that Messerschmitt up there?
But I don't know what you mean, D-Day markings.
Well, right here under the wing, right here you can see black and white. Here, and then there's black and white markers back there.
Oh yes.
It's kind of hard to pick up because of the angle, but
the Evasion stripe.
That's what
went
I
around
mean.
the wings and went around the boom.
All right, and the one on top there you had several encounters with throughout your career and downed a few. What is that one there?
Okay, this is the Messerschmitt 109G, flown by that's Captain Hans George Dipple.
And what's the story on that one? Didn't you tell me you met this gentleman?
No, I don't recall meeting him.
Okay.
I, in the past, have met several 109 pilots.
I bring that up because you said one time you met some of these pilots or something, and one of them said
there's several, I don't know how many, living in the United States, and quite often they will attend our ACES reunion. They're the German ACES, and we will naturally get together and kind of fight the war over again, you might say. But I've never forget one little session we were having. There was a half a dozen or more of the German aces, and a half a dozen of us were all in a little group talking, and we were questioning them about why did they let us come in and destroy some of their beautiful cities. We could see I've seen this from the air, and I have also seen it from the ground.
in other words, they wouldn't come up to engage you? Is that what you're saying?
No. Yes, they would come up to engage us, and that's where you get in the dogfight type of situation. I'm talking about we're asking these German pilots who just like us, they're talking with their hands.
Oh, okay.
Like every fighter pilot does. Why did they let us Americans come in with our bomber fleets and destroy a lot of their beautiful cities? Hamburg for one, Cologne for another, and the smaller cities. Why did they do? Why did the Germans let us do this? Why did they not rise up a revolt or?
Oh, I understand. Yes. Okay.
Because I kind of had a
Just to stop the carnage and the insanity.
exactly. I had sadness in my heart when I saw some of these beautiful cities and their old buildings centuries ago were all destroyed. Why did they let us do that? And one ace looked up, spoke up, and said, "Well, wouldn't you boys have done anything Roosevelt said?" I think that hit the point.
That
right
pretty
there.
well answers it.
They were under their orders, under Hitler. We were under Roosevelt's orders.
So they felt obliged to just stick it out and last it out, I suppose.
I guess.